The Euphrates has lost almost an entire Dead Sea's worth of water. This is not a figure of speech, this is a measurement. 2 satellites spent 7 years in a row weighing the Earth from orbit and worked out how much fresh water had drained out of the Tigris and Euphrates basin. The river on whose banks the planet's first cities grew up is pulling back from its own banks. And on the exposed bed, people really are finding things that should not be there. And another story has grown up around this retreat. An underground chamber, 4 broken chains, an inscription in 17 languages. Millions of people are retelling it right now. Both of them will be here. And the heaviest thing in this episode is the last story, so watch all the way to the end. You are on the Top Facts channel, and I wish everyone an enjoyable watch. The river that is retreating, 35 cubic miles. That is how much fresh water disappeared from the Tigris and Euphrates basin in just 6 years, from 2003 to 2009. Nobody was eyeballing it. The Grace satellite pair was on the job. 2 spacecraft flying one behind the other in the same orbit, about 125 miles apart. When a heavier patch of ground passes underneath them, the leading craft speeds up slightly, and the gap between the satellites changes by thousandths of an inch. Water is weight. Water goes away, and the planet gets lighter in that spot, and the instruments catch it. The result was published by the team of hydrologist Jay Famiglietti of the University of California, Irvine. 35 cubic miles is roughly the entire Dead Sea in 6 years. More than half of the loss came not from the rivers, but from groundwater. It was pumped out once what came from above stopped being enough. The Euphrates is the longest river in Western Asia, about 1,740 miles. It begins in the mountains of eastern Turkey and ends in Iraq, and its whole fate is decided upstream. In January 1990, Turkey shut off the flow for almost a month while it filled the reservoir of the Ataturk Dam. Downstream in Syria and Iraq, people simply waited. Since then, there have been more dams. Water in the middle reaches goes onto the fields, evaporates off the surface of the reservoirs, and never makes it down. In the summer of 2025, Iraqi officials reported that the country's water reserves had fallen to the lowest level in roughly 80 years. The river has taken cities with it before and given them back. In 2000, the reservoir of the Berechit Dam flooded Zeugma, an ancient city on the right bank of the Euphrates. Archaeologists worked in a race. The water was rising on schedule, and out from under the floors of Roman villas came mosaics in a state of preservation that had never been found in Turkey before. The most famous one, a woman's face they called the Gypsy Girl, was lifted out literally right before the flooding. She is now in the museum in Gaziantep, and the villa she was pulled from is underwater. Nobody knows at what level the river will stop. Forecasts for the end of the century diverge so widely that it is awkward to set them side by side. The story that has no author. The story goes like this. The bed of the Euphrates was exposed, and a fissure opened in the ground that should not have been there. Inside, a chamber. The walls are covered with a warning in 17 ancient languages. Do not open. In the center, 4 chains driven into the bedrock at the 4 points of the compass. The chains are broken from the inside. Empty. Then come the thermal imager, the footprints, the earthquake, the glow in the sky. There is no name for the lead geologist, no name for the institute, no coordinates, not one photograph of the chamber, not one report, not one publication, not one excavation permit. That last one matters more than it seems. In Iraq, any earth moving on an archaeological site goes through the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. This is not a formality. It is an agency that has spent years in court over exported tablets and knows every single expedition in the country by name. A find on that scale would have meant a press conference in Baghdad, an argument over whose territory it is, and a line of journalists out the door. None of that happened. What the story does have is a recognizable shape, a synthesized voice, pictures generated by a neural network, and not one word that anyone is personally answerable for. Videos like this are stamped out by the dozen every day, and they always have the same construction, a real fact going in and free flight after that. And that is exactly the interesting part, because almost every brick in this story is genuine. The river really is drying up. The lines in Revelation really are there. The Book of Giants exists, and it was found in the caves at Qumran. Infrasound really does give a person the sensation of someone else being present, and that has been measured in a laboratory. Who assembled a chamber with chains out of these bricks is unknown. The author did not sign it, and that, honestly, is the only detail in the whole story that honestly matches the original. The city that came out of the water. The drought of 2018 forced Iraqi power engineers to release water from the reservoir of the Mosul Dam. The crops downstream had to be saved. The level dropped, and walls rose out of the silt. The place was named Kamune after the neighboring village, a palace on the bank of the ancient Tigris. Walls up to 6 feet thick, in places surviving to the height of 2 stories. Inside, plaster with painting in red and blue. Mud brick that had lain 40 years underwater was holding its corners as though it had been laid last season. They had to work fast because the water was about to come back. The dig was a joint Kurdish and German effort. Hassan Ahmed Kasim of the Kurdistan Archaeology Organization, Ivana Puljiz of the University of Tübingen, and Peter Felsner of Freiburg. The water came back, and in January 2022, it went away again. The drought was harsher by then. In a few weeks, they managed to uncover the things that had made the hurry worthwhile: fortification towers, a multi-story storage building, and 5 ceramic vessels stuffed with clay tablets. More than 100 documents from the Middle Assyrian period, roughly the 13th century BC. One tablet was lying in its own clay envelope, unopened. There is almost no fired clay there. It is sun-dried silt, which by every rule should have slumped into mush within its first year underwater. It lay 3,500 years in the ground, then another 40 under a reservoir, and it stayed readable. Before the new flooding, everything that was not carried out was wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting and buried under gravel. The city is underwater again. Most likely this is Zakiku, a center of the kingdom of Mitanni that is mentioned in texts, and that, judging by the destruction, was brought down by an earthquake around 1350 BC. The tablets still have not been fully read. The dagger that flew in. November 1925, Howard Carter's team is unwrapping the bandages of Tutankhamun's mummy. At the right thigh, between layers of cloth, lies a dagger 13 inches long. The hilt is gold, the pommel is rock crystal, the blade is iron. This is 14th century BC Egypt, the Bronze Age. Iron at this time is more expensive than gold because Egypt does not yet know how to smelt it, and the blade is not rusty. 3,300 years and barely a trace of corrosion. The answer only came in 2016. An Italian-Egyptian team led by Daniela Comelli of the Politecnico di Milano brought a portable X-ray analyzer into the Cairo Museum, an instrument that determines the composition of a metal from its radiation and damages nothing in the object. The dagger was not even taken out of its case. The composition turned out to contain nickel, about 11%, and traces of cobalt. Terrestrial iron has almost no nickel in it. 11% with cobalt in that proportion comes from only one source: an iron meteorite. The Egyptians, it seems, understood it themselves. At roughly the same time, a new word for iron appears in the text, and it translates literally as iron from the sky. There is also a probable biography for the object. In the Amarna archive, in the list of gifts from King Tushratta of Mitanni to Pharaoh Amenhotep III, Tutankhamun's grandfather, an iron dagger with a gold hilt is mentioned. Which meteorite the metal came from has not been established for certain. Metal not made by human beings really does exist, and it is sitting in the museum. It fits in the palm of your hand. The walls that nobody signed. The most striking detail of the story is one and the same phrase, carved on the walls of the chamber in 17 ancient languages, by different hands, with different tools in different eras. 4 are named: Sumerian, Akkadian, Aramaic, Old Persian. Between the outermost 2, there are roughly 2,000 years. Sumerian stopped being a spoken language around 2000 BC, and after that lived only as a language of scholars, like Latin in medieval Europe. Old Persian cuneiform appears in the 6th century BC, and it was apparently invented specifically for the inscriptions of Darius. The last dated cuneiform tablet is an astronomical text from around AD 75, so a person who could write in Sumerian and a person who could write in Old Persian could have met, but not in the same room and not over the same wall. Multilingual inscriptions really were made in antiquity, and this is where the story truly trips. The Rock of Behistun in western Aram. Darius I, around 520 BC, a relief and a text in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, cut into a sheer wall about 300 feet above the road, with the approaches to the ledge chopped away so that nobody could climb up and touch it up. It was from this inscription that Henry Rawlinson began the decipherment of cuneiform in the 1830s and 40s, copying it while hanging on ropes. The Rosetta Stone is the same thing. 1 text, 3 writing systems, 150 496 BC, and in both cases the very first thing stated is who is speaking. Darius begins with "I am Darius, the great king." The Egyptian priests list themselves by name. In the ancient world, an important inscription was never left unsigned, not out of shyness, quite the opposite. The inscription existed precisely so that the name would outlive the man. An anonymous monumental text in that world is roughly the same thing as an unfilled-in warranty card. The metal that could not cool down. In the account of the chamber, there is one number worth grabbing onto. It is claimed that a metal like that requires a temperature above 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the surface of the sun. The surface of the sun is about 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. After that it gets easier. Iron melts at 2,800 degrees, and the Hittites could already manage that. The only metal that genuinely needs more than 5,400 is tungsten at 6,192 degrees. Tungsten is used for filaments and drilling tools. Nobody forges chains out of it. It is brittle and costs as much as an airplane, so the number in the story is not frightening. It has simply been taken from somewhere else. The warm metal is more interesting. Metal does not produce heat on its own, it conducts it. For a piece of iron to stay warm for thousands of years in cold rock, there has to be a source working inside it, and in nature there is exactly one such source: radioactive decay. It looks precisely the way the story describes. A pellet of plutonium-238 the size of a hockey puck glows a dull red all by itself, with no fire and no wires, simply because decay is going on inside it. You put it in the housing, draw off the heat with thermoelectric elements, and you get a power source that does not need the sun. The two Voyager spacecraft have been flying since 1977. That is exactly the power they use. Their instruments are going dark one after another because there is less heat, but the signal still arrives from a distance of more than 13 billion miles. So warm metal with no visible source is a real thing. It just does not lie in underground chambers. It flies beyond the edge of the solar system and weighs less than a person. The laboratory that was haunted by a fan. In the story about the chamber, there is a frequency, 18 to 19 Hertz, and a claim that at this frequency, a person feels someone else's presence. This is the only detail in the whole account that has been tested in a real experiment. 1998, a company that makes medical equipment. The staff were complaining. The shop floor was cold, there was a draft, and there was a constant feeling that someone was standing behind you. One of the women who worked there left in tears. The engineer Vic Tandy took it calmly, until one evening he stayed to work alone. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a gray figure. He turned around and there was nothing. The next day he was busy with his hobby, which was fencing. He clamped a blade in a vise to adjust the hilt, stepped away, and saw that the free end of the blade was swinging on its own. After that, it was pure engineering. Tandy walked along the shop floor with the blade clamped and found the point where the swing was greatest, right in the middle of the room. The source turned out to be a new extractor fan. It was rocking the air at a frequency of about 19 Hertz, and a standing wave had set up in the room. The human ear begins to hear at about 20 Hertz, which means there was sound in that shop and it was strong and nobody could hear it. They turned the fan off. The ghost ended. Tandy published his work in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. 5 years later, it was tested in public. In the Purcell Room in London, the psychologist Richard Wiseman and the acoustic specialist Richard Lord put on a concert into which infrasound was secretly mixed for part of the program. Listeners were asked to describe their sensations. In the infrasound sections, the number of reports of strange feelings, of anxiety, chills, and heaviness went up by about 22%. The people were convinced they were reacting to the music. So the sense of a presence is a measurable thing, and most of the time it is made by the ventilation. We have not closed that chamber yet. 2 steps remain, and the first one is on the floor. The footprints that have no way back. According to the description, undisturbed dust lay on the floor of the chamber, and 4 trails of footprints were impressed in it. The weight of each body, 400 to 500 pounds, a stride longer than a human one. The trails begin exactly at the chains and lead off into the depths. There are no return prints. And the reference here is to a real text. The Book of Giants genuinely exists. Its Aramaic fragments were found in the caves at Qumran together with the rest of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it belongs to the circle of Enochic writings about the descendants of the Watchers, the giants who are overtaken by judgment. It even has a sequel in somebody else's religion. The Manichaeans translated it and carried it east, and archaeologists found pieces of the Manichaean version at Turfan in Xinjiang, thousands of miles from Judea. The text is real. That does not add any footprints to the floor. And now about what ancient footprints look like when they do exist. Tanzania, the locality of Laetoli, 1976. Mary Leakey's group was working nearby, and one of the young staff members, Andrew Hill, fell to the ground during a horseplay scuffle with a colleague. Right in front of his face was hardened volcanic ash with impressions in it. They were excavated by 1978. A trail about 90 feet long, 3 creatures, an age of 3,660,000 years, the arch of the foot, the print of the heel, the big toe pressed against the others, which means that human ancestors were walking on 2 legs before their brains got big. The trail was excavated, studied, and buried again. It cannot be preserved in the open air. Happisburgh on the coast of Norfolk, May 2013. The tide stripped off a layer of sand and exposed a silt horizon with human footprints, more than 800,000 years old, the oldest human footprints outside Africa. Archaeologists filmed them around the clock in the rain because it was clear what was coming next. 2 weeks later, the tide erased them completely. All that is left of the find is photographs and a 3-dimensional model. Real footprints are fragile. They are photographed in the first hour, or else they will not exist. The ground that really did crack. 4:17 in the morning, February 6, 2023. Southeastern Turkey, the Pazarcık district. A shock of magnitude 7.8. 9 hours later, a second one, magnitude 7.6, 60 miles to the north. The story about the chamber says that on the border of Iraq and Turkey, there is no fault capable of producing that. There is a fault, and it is one of the most active on the planet. The East Anatolian. Along it, the Arabian Plate creeps past the Anatolian Plate, and this boundary has broken many times within human memory. 1114, 1513, 1822, 1872. The earthquake of 1822 destroyed Aleppo. Next, about the geometry. The account leans on the fact that the rupture ran in a straight line, and that this is supposedly a sign of someone's design. A straight line is the signature of a strike-slip fault. The plates do not come at each other, they run alongside each other, and the crack runs along a single plane for hundreds of miles. In 2023, the total length of the rupture across the 2 events was about 300 miles. The offset of the edges reached 23 feet. In Hatay province, an olive grove was cut in half, and half the trees moved sideways by the length of a bus. The rows stayed straight. There were simply 2 of them now. More than 53,000 people died in Turkey and about 6,000 in Syria. There are sinkholes in the ground there too, but they have nothing to do with earthquakes. On the Konya Plain in central Turkey, more than 600 craters have been counted. The cause is pumps. For decades, water was drawn out from under the plain onto the fields. The underground voids were left without support, and the ground is settling. The earth goes out from under your feet literally, with no shock at all. Glow in the sky during tremors is a disputed thing, but it has been caught on camera. In 2023, it was filmed in Turkey. In 2017, in Mexico City. There is no agreed explanation. The argument is about charges that arise in rock under load and about discharges on power lines. It is similar with animals. Martin Wakelski's group from the Max Planck Institute fitted sensors to cows, sheep, and dogs on a farm in Italian Umbria, where there were tremors in 2016 and 2017. Before some of the shocks, the animals began to move differently, sometimes 20 hours in advance. The work came out in 2020, and the authors themselves speak cautiously. There was only one farm, and turning this into a warning system has not worked out so far. The curses that really were carved. In the winter of 1922 at Byblos on the Lebanese coast, a slope collapsed after heavy rains. Tomb shafts were opened up. A year later, the Frenchman Pierre Montet went down into one of them and pulled out the stone sarcophagus of King Ahiram. Along the edge of the lid runs an inscription, one of the earliest long texts in the Phoenician alphabet from around the year 1000 BC, the very alphabet from which Greek, Latin, and our own later came, and its content is simple. Whoever opens this coffin is wished the loss of his power and his peace. Curses of this kind were written in Mesopotamia on an industrial scale. Kuduru, the stone boundary markers of the Kassite period, end with a list of the gods who are called down on the head of anyone who moves the stone or erases the inscription. Sometimes the gods are listed 20 at a time. This is not mysticism. It is legal protection of property in a world with no notary. Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, assembled a library at Nineveh. The British Museum holds about 30,000 tablets and fragments from it. At the end of many of the texts stands a colophon, described service note, and it too contains a threat. Whoever carries off this tablet, may his name and his offspring be taken from him. It did not save the library. Nineveh was burned in 612 BC, and the tablet survived precisely because clay is fired in a blaze and becomes harder. Now about what happens to the inscriptions themselves. The sarcophagus of Ahiram ended up in the National Museum of Beirut. When the Civil War began, the museum found itself right on the line dividing the city. The heavy exhibits were not moved out. They were encased in concrete right there in the halls and left that way for 15 years. The museum reopened in 1999 and the concrete came off. The curse on the lid had nothing to do with it, but it all looked exactly the way those inscriptions promise. The coffin is closed and nobody was able to touch it. The cold that ends at the threshold. According to the account, inside the chamber, the temperature dropped within seconds. Frost settled on the walls, the composition of the air changed, and the people began to feel dizziness, heaviness in the body, and pressure in the chest. A cave does not behave that way. Quite the opposite. A sealed cavity underground is the most stable place you can find. Its temperature holds at roughly the average annual temperature of the surface above it and barely wanders at all. For northern Iraq, that is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. There is nothing there for frost to come from. The symptoms, though, are described accurately. It is just that their cause is boring, and it kills people every year. Carbon dioxide accumulates in an enclosed underground space. It is heavier than air and spreads along the bottom in pits, wells, and lower chambers. At a concentration of about 3%, shortness of breath and heaviness in the head begin. Closer to 7 or 8, a person loses the ability to think and then loses consciousness. He is not suffocating in the usual sense. There is still plenty of oxygen around, but the body cannot get rid of its own carbon dioxide, and that feels like pressure on the chest. The most dangerous part is that carbon dioxide has no smell. The first thing a person notices is that thinking has become difficult, and that is exactly the moment when a decision has to be made and you have to leave. There are places where this has been going on for centuries. Outside Naples, there is the dog cave. The name comes from the fact that the guides used to demonstrate it to tourists with a dog. Down at floor level, the animal lost consciousness in a minute, while a man standing next to it at full height felt fine. Carbon dioxide was rising out of the volcanic soil and holding in a layer about 1.5 feet deep. To any sealed cavity, you can add radon as well, a colorless, odorless gas that seeps out of the rock and accumulates wherever there is no ventilation. That is why cavers and archaeologists go down into a new cavity with a gas analyzer rather than a cross. And that is why the description of the chamber is missing exactly one line: the instrument readings. In the thermal imager, the most vivid scene of the story, a thermal imager is sent into an inaccessible part of the cave. On the screen, a figure, elongated limbs, a broad torso, horns on the skull. A light is aimed at the figure and the light does not reflect and the outline blurs. The eyes return the infrared signal straight back into the lens. Two different instruments have been mixed together here, and you can see it from one step away. A thermal imager does not see light. Not at all. It picks up the object's own thermal radiation in the range of about 10 microns. You can shine a floodlight into the frame and the picture will not change. The light did not reflect on a thermal imager is the same statement as the radio did not show the color. Glowing eyes are from an entirely different piece of equipment. A night camera with infrared illumination emits its own light and catches the reflection. Cats, deer, and crocodiles have a reflective layer behind the retina, and it throws that beam back. A human being has no such layer. No primate does. Now the horns. In Mesopotamian art, a deity really is identified by horns. It is the most consistent marker across more than 2,000 years. But those are not horns. It is a headdress, a conical tiara with horns mounted in tiers. And the number of tiers works like insignia of rank. The higher the deity's rank, the more rows. On the so-called Burney relief in the British Museum, 18th century BC, the winged figure has 4 tiers, which means archaeology says exactly the opposite of what the story needs. Horns in Mesopotamia are precisely a crown. And finally, about how sealed cavities are actually found. The Scam Pyramids project began in 2015 on the Pyramid of Khufu. First, thermal imagers found patches on the faces with unusual warming. Then came muons, particles born in the atmosphere from cosmic rays that pass right through stone. Their flow weakens where there is more stone and strengthens where there is emptiness. Detectors were placed inside the pyramid and in the gallery, and data was collected for months. In 2017, a void about 100 feet long above the Grand Gallery was announced. In March 2023, a second one was confirmed, a corridor 30 feet long behind the chevron blocks of the northern face. An endoscope was pushed in through a seam between stones about an inch wide, and they got images of a space that nobody had entered for 4,500 years. Why the big void was made, nobody knows to this day. Bound at the Euphrates. The line around which the whole story is built really does exist. Revelation chapter 9 released the 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates, and further on that they are prepared for an hour, a day, a month, and a year. The text was most likely written at the end of the 1st century under the Emperor Domitian. Why the Euphrates specifically was not a question for a reader of that time. It was the border of the Roman Empire. Beyond the river stood Parthia, the only opponent that genuinely beat the Romans. In 53 BC, the Parthian cavalry destroyed Crassus's army at Carrhae, and that defeat was remembered for generations. A few lines after the 4 angels, in the same text, a cavalry host appears, and its number is given as 200 million. A person of the 1st century did not read this as theology. He read it as, the border has opened and cavalry is coming through. As for the Sumerian tablets that supposedly describe 4 beings shackled beneath the great river, no such text exists. There is something else, and it is older. In Mesopotamian literature, binding is a constant motif. In the Enuma Elish, Marduk defeats Tiamat and her 11 monsters and does not kill them. He shackles them and sets them up as trophies. The bird-like Anzu who stole the tablets of destinies is also taken alive. The underworld is the land of no return from which nobody comes out. The idea of a power that was not destroyed but locked away was basic to that culture, but the direct match in meaning comes not from a Sumerian text, but from the Book of Enoch. The Watchers are beings who came down to humans and taught them what they should not have. They are bound and placed underground until the day of judgment. Azazel is thrown into a cleft in the desert and covered over with stones. The Book of Enoch is not an invention of novelists. The New Testament quotes it. The Epistle of Jude cites several lines from it almost word for word. It survived in full only in Ethiopic, in the canon of the Ethiopian Church, and Europe considered it lost until James Bruce brought copies back from Ethiopia at the end of the 18th century. And in 1947, in the caves at Qumran, Aramaic fragments of it were found, 2,000 years older than the Ethiopic manuscripts. The words "do not open" are not in it. The border. The Euphrates appears in the 14th verse of the 2nd chapter of the Bible as the 4th river of Eden. Then it becomes the far limit of the land promised to Abraham. Then it becomes the river across which people are led into captivity, and at the very end, in the 16th chapter of Revelation, it dries up. Not as an image, as an event. Now for what is actually happening to the river, and this is the last story in the episode. The water of the Euphrates is divided among 3 countries, and it is divided according to papers that are more than 30 years old. In 1987, Turkey signed a protocol with Syria to let an average of 500 cubic meters per second through to the border, about 18,000 cubic feet per second. In 1990, Syria agreed with Iraq that 58% of the water arriving would go on downstream. Both figures were considered generous at the time. Since then, there are more dams on the river, the fields upstream drink more, and evaporation off the reservoirs in this climate eats volumes that are not written into the agreements at all. Iraq is at the very bottom of the flow. It gets what is left. Then begins the arithmetic there is no wriggling out of. When there is less fresh water in the river, the salt water of the Persian Gulf pushes up the Shat al-Arab. In 2018, it reached Basra, a city of more than 2 million people. Water came out of the taps that could not be used for washing or for drinking. Over that summer, about 118,000 people ended up in hospitals. To the south lie the Mesopotamian marshes, the very ones that were drained almost completely by canals in the 1990s and partly reflooded after 2003. In 2016, they were placed on the World Heritage List. They are shrinking again now, and water buffalo are being let out of them because the water has become too salty for livestock. According to the 2024 census, more than 45 million people live in Iraq. In 20 years, there will be noticeably more of them, and noticeably less water. The ancients understood the Euphrates as a border. Beyond it, the settled world ended and what you do not control began. And the border really is shifting now, only not because somebody broke the chains. The silt on the dried out bed cracks into neat polygons, and you can walk across them on foot where barges passed 40 years ago. At the beginning, I promised that the heaviest thing in this episode would come at the end, and that there would be no chains and no creatures in it. Here it is. The story about the chamber with 4 broken chains is confirmed by nothing at all. No photograph, no report, no name. It is assembled out of real details, like a collage made of other people's photographs. A real river, a real text of Revelation, a real Book of Giants, real infrasound at 19 Hz. Every piece can be checked. The hole does not exist. And the river, meanwhile, is genuinely running dry, with no fissures of impossible geometry, with no inscriptions in 17 languages. Dams, pumps, evaporation, an agreement with a figure of 500 cubic meters per second signed in 1987. All of it can be looked up in open documents, and not a single line in them is frightening. Ancient people marked the Euphrates as the edge of the world. Satellites now weigh that edge from orbit and hand back the result in cubic miles, 35 in 6 years. Write in the comments everything you think about what is happening to the Euphrates and about the stories that have grown up around it. And subscribe to the Top Facts channel for a collection of the most incredible facts and videos from all over the internet. Thanks so much to everyone for watching, and right now go watch our previous incredible episodes which have already appeared on your screen.